Welcome back to For Goodness Sake, where as a former Mormon, I take a look at the good things I carry with me into my new, more secular worldview. Today's topic is faith. This is a very big topic, and I'm just going to give a very brief overview today. I hope in future videos to be able to break out the individual aspects of faith and talk about them individually because there's tons of examples and interesting things here. But I want to give an overview of this huge concept we call faith. Faith was always very important to me as a Mormon, and to me, the meaning was really a kind of letting go of doubt, embracing the mystery, admitting ignorance, and sort of accepting the gospel of Jesus Christ as it was being presented to me all the time in Mormonism. Since it's such a big topic, I'm going to break it down for you. In my opinion, faith breaks down into basically 5 areas or 5 aspects. Let me know in the comments if you think I've missed one or if there's some other aspect of faith I'm not taking into account. Here's how I break it down. Number 1, risk-taking. In other words, having faith to go forward. Number 2, blinders. Part of faith is narrowing our focus on just the things that are important. Related to that is number 3, steadiness. Part of faith is just saying I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to be steady and honor the covenants, the promises that I've made. I'm going to keep going forward even as my moods change and whatnot. Number 4, turning outward. So when we say we have faith, we're saying we're embracing this larger universe, this larger gospel, whatever it is. We're kind of turning from the in to the out. And finally, and maybe most fundamentally, faith is just belief, just believing the thing that is being put in front of you. I want to talk through them again, and I'm going to do it from the perspective of this concept of Aristotle and the golden mean. So if you've never heard of this, basically the concept is that yes, we have virtues, but what we want to have is the middle amount of that virtue. We don't want to have too little of it, obviously, but having too much of it is also bad. So courage is kind of a classic example, right? We want to have courage, right? We know that being overly timid is not good. We want to have courage to do things. But too much courage is recklessness, right? It's going way too far. And so you want to have the middle amount of courage, the right amount of courage, a balance of courage. So I'm going to, again, just walk through those 5 aspects of what I believe faith breaks down into and talk about how, in my humble opinion, the Christian version of faith is an excess of these things that would otherwise be virtues. So let's talk through them real quick. Risk-taking. A lack of risk-taking is a lack of personal growth. The golden mean in risk-taking is calculated, eyes wide open risk-taking, where we say, I see what the risks are. I don't know everything about the situation, but I'm going to take the risk anyway. I'm going to go forward. Excess of risk-taking is hopefulness towards something that we really don't have any evidence for, but we kind of hope it's out there. In business, a lot of times we call this success-based planning. It's where we just hope. And the classic catchphrase is, hope is not a strategy. You can't just hope your way to victory. You've got to have calculated risk. Number 2, blinders. And you might think, well, blinders, that's not a virtue at all. And I would argue it really is a virtue. Without blinders, we often have a lack of focus. It's kind of like an ADD, it's kind of like, oh, follow this, follow that, whatever. It's not being able to put blinders on, to settle down and accomplish a thing. Ignore the extraneous information and accomplish something. So the golden mean of blinders is having selective blindness. It's ignoring things that don't really matter. You might not like something about your coworker, for example, but if it's not important to the work at hand, you can put on selective blinders and just say, okay, let's focus on the work here and get our stuff done without being distracted by all these other things. So it's a good thing to be able to cooperate and facilitate accomplishment in a group if we have selective blinders. Going to excess with this is what I would call truth blindness, where we stay so focused, and because it's so important to get this one thing done, that we have pertinent information truth and evidence and data that we're just ignoring because we have these blinders on. And so that's the excess. That's having too much blinders. The third one is steadiness. We need to have that kind of steadiness and commitment to what matters and is important in our lives. But if we have too much of that steadiness, then we're not able to see new evidence and change with the new evidence. We're not being intellectually honest. We're being stubborn. And the stubbornness is also bad. That's the excess of that steadiness. Number 4 is selflessness versus selfishness. And you might think, how is that even part of faith? But I was just reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I really think this is what C.S. Lewis's second definition of faith boils down to. What he does is he advocates relying on Jesus Christ and turning over our own will to the will of Jesus Christ. And I think that that's an important thing to do, to turn from the selfishness to the selflessness. But I think that going to Jesus Christ is an excess of that virtue just because it imagines a being that may or may not be there. So the golden mean in selflessness is turning ourselves over to larger causes than ourselves, loving our neighbors, embracing whatever important worldwide improvement or cause that is important to you. That's the golden mean of selflessness. Okay, and then the final one is just belief itself. And yes, it's important to have belief in things. If we don't have belief in things, well then it's kind of the classic line from Hamilton, if you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for? So if we don't have belief in something, we're not standing for anything. We don't have principles, right? We need to have that belief in something. But the golden mean there is having belief with evidence, being able to back up our beliefs with concrete evidence that's shareable and convincing to other people. The excess of that virtue is belief for the sake of belief, believing in something without the evidence. In another video, we'll talk about how I believe that Christianity really has jumped the shark. It's considered a virtue to have belief for the sake of belief alone. Okay, so I've talked through a lot of stuff here, but let me just bring it back together. Faith is still good and still a good thing. We can still have faith. There are good aspects of faith. Just briefly, we can have calculated risk, which is really important to have. We can have selective blindness to facilitate cooperation. We can have steadiness and faithfulness in our commitments. We can turn ourselves out to bigger causes, turning away from selfishness. And we can have belief with evidence, belief in and confidence in good things. And those are all the good aspects of faith that I want to hold on to as I move on from Mormonism. So let's embrace the good parts of faith, even as we reject the excessive faith, and carry forward with faith in the things that we're accomplishing. And let's do it for goodness sake.